Mr. Bhargava, it's a pleasure for us to have you with us as we celebrate our 19th birthday week. Over these years, you have indulged many of our requests, and of course, you have created a lot of wealth for investors, and that's why we were particularly keen to have you in what is a very big day for us. Thank you for joining us. Well, first up, I'm not starting with anything positive. The November month saw a contraction of sales. So how's the third quarter? How would you sum up? Is this just a routine seasonal fall, or is something not quite right in the demand scenario?
Lata, may I first congratulate CNBC for its 19th birthday and wish you all the best going forward. As far as your question is concerned, I've been analyzing the past data of sales for Maruti for about the last 20 years. And what we find is that the pattern has been that there are 2 good years in the sense that sales are 10% or even much higher than that. We've gone as far as 24, 25%. And after 2 years of growth, it drops to below 10%, at times to just 1 or 2%. That pattern has been there, except that we've had 4 years of plus 10% growth till last year. And that was because of new models which became blockbusters, as you know. We've also found that every year, around the time of the festival season, new models are introduced which lead to this spurt in sales. This year, as you know, we have not had any new model launch. So that itself has had an impact, because the difference between a 10% growth and the 3% growth is around 15,000 vehicles, and that amount comes from the new sale. The third interesting thing which I found was that in the year before general elections, sales go down. In the year of elections, sales go up. So all these factors have been there, other than the usual things which have been talked about. But the numbers which I have just mentioned to you, you can check on these. These tell a story of how cyclical the sales process is in India.
Okay. Mr. Bhargav, good morning. This is Sonia here, and thank you so much for your wishes. You've been a part of our long journey for as long as I can remember, and I hope you continue to do that for many more years to come. You were the first person to flag off the slowdown in retail sales, even when wholesale numbers were looking very good. But you also spoke about the possibility of a double-digit growth by the end of FY19. So far, we're at single digits, about 7.5%. What's the sense you're getting? Could we get to double-digit, or is it going to be a single-digit growth year, at least for the next 2 years?
As I said last time I met the media, was that this year getting to double digits is going to be very challenging. We are still doing our best, but the task is not going to be easy. And I would not be surprised if we don't get to double digits this year, because of the fact that this is a pre-election year. We've had full good years. We've not had a new model launch when should have had. All of these things are going to come into play.
Okay. Mr. Bhargava, now that you're saying that in election years, normally things do better, and of course now you've got a little bit of petrol sales fall and petrol prices fall and interest rates fall, should we look at calendar 19 with much better, much greater hope?
Normally I would have said yes. But there's one other factor which you have to consider for next year, and that is the introduction of BS6. I'm not able to determine what impact BS6 is going to have on sales next year. Whether customers will come in a rush to buy BS4 vehicles before BS6 comes in to avoid the price rise, or whether they will wait for BS6 vehicles to come in because they don't want to buy BS4 vehicles. The customer behavior on this is still not very determinate. So this factor of uncertainty will be there. Other than this, I would say yes, next year should be a good year.
Can you give us a little more detail of what's exactly happening on the ground? Because there are so many reports about, panic with respect to dealers giving large discounts, much higher than the year-end discounts that we generally see. Inventory levels being at 7 to 8 weeks, much higher than the 3 to 4 weeks that it generally is. Is the situation actually that bad?
We don't load our dealers with excessive inventories. The norm has always been 1 month, but our dealers have inventories which are significantly below a month's. I don't know the exact number, but it's not anywhere near 140, 150,000 cars.
Mr. Bhargava, nevertheless...
But what you're right is that the retail sales so far, the retail sales in the last 4 or 5 months have been more or less flat, and the build-up of inventory, therefore, has had to be slowed down. Production, to that extent, has been slower than what would otherwise have been possible.
Okay. So what's going wrong with the export segment? The November export numbers were also nothing much to write home about. One would have thought that the rupee should have helped.
You know, export markets are subject to certain rules and regulations of new countries or the countries where we are exporting. Indonesia had put some restrictions this year because they had run into difficulties on their budget and foreign exchange and things. And sales in Indonesia have gone down, which has cut into the overall performance of the export sector.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. I'm going to come to exports in a bit, but I want to just take you up on the first point that you mentioned, that, the reason for the sales slowdown this year could be that you've not had any new launches. In fact, in the last 3 years, Maruti's volume growth was majorly led by the Baleno, the Brezza, and the Swift Desire refresh as well. Going ahead, which segment do you see major growth coming in from, which will help you continue to grow ahead of the industry?
See, we have recently launched the Ertiga, but let's see how this performs. And then I think some other launches are due early next year. And the impact of those launches will actually be felt in the next financial year. So the growth so far has always been in the, not the entry sector, but the entry sectors, next segment where people are taking cars which are much better loaded with electronics and gadgets and things. And that sector, I think, will continue to grow along with the SUV sector when we have a new SUV come.
Okay. Mr. Bhargava, is there anything about, these higher hail cabs and share cabs which are eating into the overall demand in the country? People just buying fewer cars because there is this excellent service available.
I've seen the figure of sales to the aggregators. They are not at all large figures at all. You sell 30, 40,000 cars to an aggregator. What difference will it make?
No, I'm speaking about the opposite.
The future is with the aggregators, but is not going to impact sales, or this downturn or flat sales at the moment this year. I don't think it can be attributed really to aggregators at all.
Okay, no, if aggregators pick up as a lifestyle, then perhaps the need for a second car in a family will ebb. And therefore, do you see that as a factor?
There will be a short-term impact, but the aggregators will buy more, and their replacement cycle is much faster than the replacement cycle of an individual customer. An individual runs his car 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 kilometers in a year. The aggregator runs it maybe 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 kilometers in a year. So he replaces his vehicle every 2 years or so.
In fact, I wanted to flip that question the other way around. Are you seeing a slowdown in purchases from aggregators like Ola and Uber? Because that's the sense we got when we spoke to a player like Toyota. I mean, they told us that, Etios was the largest selling model for them with the aggregators, but now they've seen a big slowdown there. Are you facing that as well?
Last year, I believe, was slightly slower than the previous year. But this year's sales, if you prorata them, they are going at about the same level as 2016.
Mr. Bhargava, you know, as a long-term viewer of this market, not just in India, but in other geographies as well, how long do these down cycles last? You said that you'll have had a couple of good years past, and therefore this downturn doesn't surprise you. How long does the trough normally last?
Normally 1 year.
Okay.
There's one year, bad year after 2 good years, and then back to 2 good years. That's the pattern which has happened in the past. We did have a period when we had 2 or 3 bad years, all running together, but that was the period when there was this diesel, petrol pricing problem, lack of diesel cars and all that, the problem at Manesar. So that was an unusual period.
Sure.
If you take that period out, it's 2 good years followed by 1 bad year.
Okay, all right. You know, you also spoke about exports. I want to come back to that. You were telling Nada about the fall in some of the export markets like Indonesia. There's also been currency devaluation, export restrictions, which impacted the sales. Do you think it would be hard for you to meet the export target? I mean, what is the internal target that the company is working with over the next 2 years?
This year's, we haven't got a long-term target. This year's target was, I think, about 125,000 cars. And I think that has been revised downwards to maybe around 110 or 115,000. I'm not sure of the exact number, but it has been revised down.
Okay. So would the dip in volumes be made up by better margins? After all, cost of money, inflation, fuel prices have all slipped.
Export earnings don't make too much impact on the overall margins of the company.
I didn't mean export. I said overall, will Maruti have better margins to work with, given all these factors, cost of money, cost of petrol, everything going down?
Overall margins, no, we normally don't make comments on margins.
Okay.
And I can only say generally on the issue of margins, there are adverse factors at the same time. Cost of imports have gone up. Material costs have gone up. Sure, the export earnings, especially to dollar countries, has also gone up. But the net impact, as you said, discounts are higher. So net impact, all this is what will come out in the final margins. So it's very difficult to comment today how the margins will move.